Abandoning Aleppo, buses begin evacuations from the city's last rebel-held enclave, taking fighters and civilians to the opposition stronghold of Idlib. And how safe will they be, given that the president is vowing to recapture every inch of his war-torn country? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zaidan. It's an evacuation that effectively ends a four-year battle for what was Syria's financial centre and largest city before the civil war erupted. Thousands of rebels and their families and other civilians are being moved out of the last opposition-held districts of shattered eastern Aleppo. Well, this is how it's supposed to happen. Civilians are to be taken from the Al-Ansari and Sukkari neighbourhoods towards the west, past Ramusa and then on to Khan al-Asal. If everything goes according to plan, more fighters then leave on Friday. Eventually, they'll all go to neighbouring Idlib province, which is largely controlled by a powerful rebel alliance. Let's bring our guest into the show. I have here in the studio Marwan Kabalan. He's a Syrian political analyst at the Doha Institute. In New York, we have Dr. Annie Sparrow, Deputy Director of the Human Rights Programme at Mount Sinai. And in Ariha Idlib province, Noor Halaq, a field coordinator for the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Good to have you all with us. If I could start with Dr. Annie, take us through this process of evacuation. How and what is supposed to happen?
Well, what is supposed to happen, of course, is that tens of thousands of civilians are meant to be evacuated. We've seen that start this morning, thank God, after an aborted effort 2 days ago. And the sickest ones, of course, are meant to be bussed out right now to hospitals in western Aleppo where they can receive treatment. And that should continue, but we don't really know enough, and that's one of the biggest problems, because over the last 2.5 weeks, since Aleppo has gradually fallen, eastern Aleppo, this is a place where there have been 250,000 civilians living, and only up to 10,000 fighters maximum, 5,000 there now. So, and these civilians, a lot of those people are still there, and we don't know enough about the situation, about when, how they are going to come out of these besieged areas and what state they are in, because many people are too weak to even leave. We've seen people in wheelchairs, of course, lots and lots of parents carrying babies still attached to IV drips or so forth, people who aren't actually able to leave or too weak. It's great that they're, of course, meant to be able to go to Idlib, which is, as you said, largely in control of rebel alliances such as the Free Syrian Army, such as Ahrar al-Sham, and there it is a province with 45 hospitals or so and 95 primary health centres, so people theoretically should be able to receive good vet care there. Of course, what we're concerned about is they're simply moving out of one frying pan into another fire, or vice versa, because as this population in Aleppo has been seriously starved for pretty much a year now, remembering the siege started this time last January. Food prices are incredibly high, where it costs about $40 or so for a tiny piece of meat, maybe 50 or 60 or upwards of that for a pound of salt. We've seen incredibly malnourished children and adults. Right, so
still a lot of challenges, perhaps waiting people as they arrive in Idlib. Let's go over to Noor. You're in Ariha, close to Idlib. What sort of arrangements are in place in Idlib to receive these evacuated people? Will they find shelter, food, clothes? I mean, Dr. Annie was talking about simple things that we take for granted, like the price of meat might simply be too expensive for evacuated people to even dream of.
Yes, actually, many organizations, Syrian organizations and international organizations, are working on preparing shelters for these people. Most of the shelters will be permanent, like camps in the north of Syria, like in Atma area, if you know Atma, in Idlib, in the north. Till now, we are shorting a lot of places. Like till now, we can contain up to 15,000 people in the permanent places for shelters. After that, we don't know where people are going to go. We don't know if people even have the money to rent houses in Idlib province.
So where are they supposed to go? I mean, at this point, the buses, you know, the first batch of buses have arrived. Others will be coming over the next day or two. I mean,
yeah.
Where literally are the buses going to drop people off at if the housing hasn't been entirely sorted out?
Yeah, 2 hours ago, about 20 buses dropped 1,150 people in Al Rashidin area, which is in western rural Aleppo side. It's 70 kilometers away from Idlib province center. So there is 150 people are very deep injured. They are going to be moved to Turkey, I think, to the hospitals in Turkey through Bab al-Hawa checkpoint. The healthy people are going to go to the camps in the north. People who have money or have families or relatives, they are going to go to their relatives' houses.
Marwan here in the studio. This hasn't been an easy deal to reach, has it? Do we even know how many people, what their needs are, what the complete picture is on their state, their medical state, their health state, even their mental state, which you would normally need to do for an evacuation like this, right?
Sam, I think, first of all, we are skipping a very important question here. That is why these people are supposed to leave even their homes. If the fighters, there is a deal. There is a deal here between Russia and Turkey, and that deal actually includes the most important thing actually for the regime and the Iranians, which is the fighters are or must leave the city. So if the fighters are leaving the city, why the civilians should leave the city if the fighting is going to end? Because if the fighters are leaving the city, so then there is no need actually for the fighting to continue.
But and these people must stay. People that we've spoken to in Aleppo in the last few days, they've said, some of them said they are afraid of the regime. They don't view the forces coming from the regime as a liberating force. They don't trust the regime forces with their lives.
Absolutely.
I mean, do you think those civilians would want to stay?
Absolutely. But the idea here, Sami, is that this regime actually is not supposed to punish a whole community for the deeds of people actually who might not be really representing this community, because the decision to fight from the very beginning might not have been the decision of those people who are actually punished by the Syrian regime, by the Iran-backed militia, and also by the Russians. And if we are having Russia as a guarantor for this deal, which has been made between President Vladimir Putin and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. So I think Russia should guarantee the safety, security of those people who are going to stay in Aleppo. So this is something that, in my opinion, is very, very important to take into account.
All right, we're going to pick up on some of those points you mentioned, but before we do that,
Yes. I just say that
very briefly, Annie,
have always been targeted. Yes, hospitals have always been targeted. On a Sunday, one of the last hospitals, M3, was evacuated. Other civilians took shelter there because, you know, shelters are reinforced and safer there, the hospitals there. And then all of those civilians taking shelter inside that empty hospital were then shot by, you know, entering forces. So we absolutely know it's not safe.
Right.
We used to have door-to-door vaccinations. Now we have door-to-door executions.
All right. I want to bring into the conversation, we're delighted to have Ralph Al-Hajj. He's joining us now from Amman, Jordan. He's with the International Committee of the Red Cross, which of course has been working to help coordinate the evacuations. And Ralph, first of all, do you view the evacuation so far to be a successful operation? Because I understand there are many moving fluid pieces, right?
Whether is it a success or not, well, so far we have managed to evacuate 26 wounded civilians from the eastern quarters of Aleppo. That's a success for these individuals, and for us, success is a big word. What we need is that the ceasefire holds, that we are able to evacuate more sick and wounded from the eastern quarters of the city, and to be able to transport them safely to medical healthcare structures in the western rural Aleppo areas, and that the civilians that are leaving in buses, we don't know the numbers. We have seen the buses, but we don't know how many people are in the buses. We know that there are a lot of people in the buses, and to call it a success, we are yet to see, but so far so good in terms of what we were able to do for the sick and wounded from the eastern quarters of the city.
Okay, but Ralph, other than the 26 people who are no doubt in dire need of medical help, what about the thousands of civilians that you mentioned there? Do you have a timeline for when you think you're going to be able to complete the evacuation of civilians?
It could and should take more than 1 day for sure. The numbers are huge. We are still focusing to be able to evacuate up to 250 to 300 sick and wounded. That is the priority for the ICRC and the Syrian Arab Red Crescent at this stage. These people's lives are in danger, and we have to get them to the nearest hospital possible. Then, of course, the second priority, and not the least important, are the civilians who are, as we saw, in buses and on their way. Of course, the evacuation will not finish today. It may take up to a few days. It may take more. It all depends
Ralph,
on
sorry,
how much
let me jump in here and ask you a question which I posed to our panel a moment ago. Where you made it clear there, we don't even know exactly how many civilians need to be evacuated. Where are all these people going to go? Do you have housing arranged for thousands of people, a number of which exactly we don't even know? Is there food, shelter, clothing awaiting them?
Indeed, I can speak about our preparations in the western side of the city and other areas. We do have emergency relief aid packages waiting for people who arrive. And in the past week, when there was some displacement or some thousands of people who left from the eastern quarters to the western quarters of the city, we were able to immediately support them with food, medical health services, as well as emergency water services.
Right.
However, if people choose to go to Idlib province and the rural areas in the western rural areas where we do not have access, we will not be able to assist them as the International Committee of the Red Cross with the Syrian Arab Red Crescent.
That's a bit worrying, because we understand a lot of these people are in fact going to go to Idlib. And Dr. Annie, how concerned are you about the fate of these people, not only in terms of what awaits them, but how sure are we that people are not going to disappear, as has been the case in some earlier deals and evacuations?
Well, I think we can be incredibly worried about that, because the whole process is shrouded in secrecy. Of course, we're relieved that they are going to Idlib, where it is, I mean, Idlib is a government where there is upwards of 2.5 million people already. They're going to be crammed in there, but at least the agreement is that they can go there. But we have seen, of course, that hundreds, if not thousands, of all the men who have come out between the ages of 18 and 45 have immediately been conscripted straight into the Syrian army, in some cases to go back to the very same front lines they've just left, only on the other side. We know that many have been shot. We know that families of fighters have been shot already, including children. You know, a child is a child is a child. So we can be very concerned that a lot of people may just be disappeared immediately, as we have seen in other evacuations.
All right, those are good points.
Places,
Hang on, Dr. Anna. Briefly go back to Ralph, very briefly. Not to blame you, sir. We know that the ICRC, of course, working under very difficult conditions, but do you have any monitoring process there to ensure that people are not going to end up conscripted back onto front lines or shot and so on, some of the things that Dr. Annie was saying? Briefly, Ralph.
In brief, our bilateral dialogue with the Syrian government and our requests that not only with the government, with other parties, that these violations do not happen. This is our job, and this is what we can do to remind the parties to respect international humanitarian law and the laws of war and the Geneva Conventions, as well as international humanitarian.
You're just reminding all parties.
There's a special responsibility here on the shoulders of the Russians, because the Russians actually
that is our role, and
the Russians are presenting themselves as a guarantor of this deal between Iran-backed militia on the one hand, and the regime on the one hand, and the opposition on the other hand. And I think this is the responsibility of the Russians to make sure that those people actually exit the city without being shot or disappear or getting...
Let's take that, if we can call it guarantee, to Ariha and ask the question to Noor. Do you think that thought that the Russians are involved this time is a comforting one for people being evacuated and those perhaps in Idlib and where you are waiting for relatives to come?
Well, I will tell you something. As for the people in Aleppo, in the free areas, yes, we guarantee that we are communicating with them all the time. That what is happening till now, no disappearance for anyone. But what about the people who are now in the regime areas after breaking into the Aleppo suburbs in the few days ago? I was communicating with my friends that went to the regime areas. I couldn't communicate with them. One of them told me that, what do you think? What will you do if your child is dying from hunger, and you know that the regime is going to cut your head if they cut you? What are you going to do? Are you going to stay in Aleppo, besieged Aleppo, or are you going to surrender yourself? I said, no, I'm going to surrender. I will surrender myself. If I have a guarantee that my child is going to live, yes, I can go to the regime and surrender myself. 44 people were killed yesterday in Al Firdaus suburb in Aleppo, and as they were killed on in their houses. We don't know the numbers, but we are very sure from this 44. And the joke is that the Mustora, for example, comes on the open and say that there is no proof that the regime did that. So what? There is no proof.
Marwan, Marwan, the bigger picture here. I mean, we're seeing this is not the first evacuation, and it's unlikely to be the last, right?
Absolutely.
What are we seeing demographically happening here? Are we seeing people being pushed into a small pocket in the north?
This is my major concern here. This is why I said from the very beginning that those civilians actually are not supposed to be forced to leave their homes, and there should be a third party to guarantee their security and safety.
Will it
because
be
this
next?
Because as you said, I mean, this is not going to be the last demographic change. This is a real demographic change in Syria's largest city.
So what happens in a few weeks or months down the road if the regime turns its sights, as is expected, towards Idlib?
Because this is going to happen everywhere almost. But for example, we are expecting this also to happen in the eastern Ghouta, in the suburb of Damascus. We are expecting this to happen in many other places where the regime actually is providing safe exit for people in return for their changing their place of living from where they live right now into Idlib. I think the regime grand design is to move all these people who are opposing him actually into Idlib, and bring this demographic change into to take place, and that is something that must concern every Syrian right now.
Well, I can go back to Ralph. Ralph, as I said, this is not the first. It's probably not the last evacuation. There are other areas which are besieged. Does this model of, if we can call it model, of what's happening in Aleppo give you hope, give you any indication that you might be able to arrange some help for other besieged areas?
Yes, for sure. Any agreement between the warring parties in any conflict gives us hope for the fate of the people. We have been asking for safety of civilians ever since the onset of this conflict.
Well, can you tell us, are you working on evacuations to oversee evacuations elsewhere?
Not yet, not yet. We do not negotiate the evacuations. We play the role of the neutral intermediary. As you can see today, we transport the wounded and sick, and we implement the evacuation. But the terms of the evacuation, this is negotiated between the parties themselves. We do not play the negotiator in such evacuations. We hope to see more ceasefires for the benefit of the people of Syria. We hope to see more ceasefires, more evacuations, but if people want to remain home, they have to be provided with the safety, and they have the right to stay home, as some of your guests have noted.
All right, I want to take the question back to Syria, back to Ariha now with Noor. Has the opposition learnt the lessons from Aleppo? Does it look to you like they are managing the area in any better way to make sure that civilian suffering doesn't happen again, especially if, as is expected, the regime forces turns its sights to Idlib at some point?
Yeah, unfortunately, till now we didn't see anything to new to protect the area.
So do they have a plan at all?
I can't tell you that if they have a plan or no, but I can tell you that they still, till now, they are apart. Till now, there is no one flag that we can gather under. Till now, there is no one person that can speak in the name of the opposition, and this is the problem. And by the way, all the countries that are funding the regime or funding the opposition play the negative role in this. Because, for example, the coalition of the opposition in Turkey, every person in the coalition is backed and supported from a different country, and maybe these countries do not agree with each other, and this is the problem.
Right.
The same happened to the factions. Like, for example, the Gulf support some factions, then America support other factions, and this will lead to that factions will fight each other
as well. Because we have seen this agreement between the different parties to the same camp, actually, because the Russians were negotiating this deal with the Turks, actually, but Iran, Hezbollah, and the Shiite militia on the ground actually were very much
against it. It is a messy situation. Dr. Annie, you know, how easy is it for people who are evacuated, once their immediate needs are taken care of, to go back to some kind of normal life? I mean, things like getting your kids back into school, getting a job. I mean, it sounds, you know, almost unsuitable to be talking about those things right now. But ultimately, what's going to happen to people who are fleeing to Idlib?
They will get shot. They will get killed.
Ultimately,
from the,
what's happened is
let's give Dr. Annie a chance, and we'll come back to you for this time, Noor.
They will face the same situation as we've seen in Aleppo and elsewhere and in Ghouta. And this is the problem, is that, you know, the opposition are not responsible for the safety of the civilians. The government is responsible for the safety of its own civilians. In Ghouta, for example, where we have nearly 500,000 civilians still, you remember the case of the little Siamese conjoined twins who were born in July. It took a great deal of effort to get them evacuated from Ghouta to Damascus. And then there were many, you know, offers from international areas, including the United States, from Germany, from Portugal, from Italy, to take those little conjoined twins and, you know, where they needed multidisciplinary care and surgery, ultimately 6 or 12 months down the line. Now, we didn't see what actually happened to those tiny twins, the smallest victims of war, was that they died of heart failure under very suspicious circumstances after their mother was denied to see them. And what we feel is that the government tried to separate these twins themselves, failed, and then buried them in a military cemetery along with a lot of other Caesar victims from the detention and incarceration centres.
Right.
And the mother was not even allowed to take these twins back to Douma. So if we can, you know, take those twins as say that even if the government will not protect the tiniest victims of war, there's not much hope for anyone else.
Okay,
so
I think Noor wanted, we just got about 30 seconds left, so I want to give it to Noor to continue the thought and particularly answer this question. What is happening ultimately to people who are evacuated? Do they stay as internally displaced people in Syria, or do they try and move to Turkey or Europe or Lebanon and elsewhere?
If you have money, you can go, but if you don't have money, you will stay, and mostly all of them don't have money they will live like we live in Syria, under shelling every day. And the Russian jets and the Syrian jets do not they shell civilians every day in the free areas. So I will give you one example. For this city, for example, Ariha, we lost 150 people in 1 month in the main market. It's the main market. It's a vegetable market. Like, we lost all these people in the market, right, apart from the rest of the areas. Why are they sharing markets? They do not. They are pretending to fight terrorists,
right?
But they are killing civilians in the free areas. That's what Russia and Syrian regime are doing.
Attack against
I'm
schools
afraid. I'm
Remember
afraid
that
we
terrible
are
attack
out
against
of
schools in
time.
Idlib?
Forgive us, Dr. Annie and the others. I'm sorry, we are out of time, so we'll have to leave the discussion there. Marwan Kabalan, Annie Sparrow, Noor Halak and Ralph Al-Hajj. And thank you too for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, just head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zaidan, and the whole team here, for now, it's goodbye.